Okay, so this is a theory that I've kind of been working on for a while, probably since I was a child, involving the Q and involving how time works in Star Trek. Um, Quick disclaimer, I have not watched Star Trek Discovery. I could not get past the way they portrayed Klingons. It just didn't work for me. But I don't think that there's anything in that show that could possibly derail this theory. Little side note, if you're not a big fan of Star Trek, you probably won't find this very enjoyable. So, in order for me to talk about my main theory, which is the Q, why are they there? What are they good for? We first have to talk about time and how it works specifically in Star Trek. This is something that I don't think is exactly explained just in full clarity. They always kind of make a point that it's confusing. Um, but what I've observed in episodes, this is kind of the theory that makes sense to me. Time has all these different paths and directions that it could go. Basically, if you were to come to a fork in the road, and have to make a decision whether to go right or left, potentially what happened is you chose both right and left, and now there are two different timelines, two different two different paths that you're going on. It is possible to kind of jump the gap between the paths and interact with the you who went right instead of left or left instead of right. By going back in time, you're not necessarily um, removing your timeline, but creating a new one. The timeline that you left to interrupt time continued without you, or it fell apart, but it existed. These different timelines create sort of a mess. Imagine that for every decision, every turning point in your life, there was a different timeline. And not only that, for your life, for everybody's life, every species' life, every person who ever existed, there's all these different timelines and different paths. Try to stand time up, you have all these different branches. This is kind of the theory I'm working with. Time is kind of like a tree and it branches out. Whenever you watch an episode where they shift to another timeline, what you find is that they often are interacting with the same people. Granted, a lot of them are doing opposite things, they're doing very different things, but they're the same characters. One could argue that it's just because the writers didn't want to operate with an entirely new cast, and nobody would really relate to an entirely new cast anyway. But we want to come up with something that actually works with the theory of the show. Here's my theory. The reason everything's so similar, and not only that, the reason that everybody's able to come back to their timeline, able to find it, um, is because there's someone pruning the tree. So now we come to the Q. What are the Q there for? We see that they do a lot of their own thing. They are omnipotent and they have all this power, and yet they're able to just make these decisions about life and death. It seems like they can do whatever they want, but then at the same time they talk about this responsibility, and our first interaction with them, or our first experience of them, is actually as they're judging humanity. Perhaps when the Q were judging humanity, they were judging whether or not they could continue in the timeline, or if humanity would be a factor that would eventually cause the tree to split. So if time is a tree and it has all these branches, imagine just all these hundreds, thousands, millions, billions, trillions, gazillions of options. If you've ever seen a tree that gets weighed down too much, sometimes those trees split and they start touching the ground. Well, I don't know what that would look like if time started splitting, but I can't imagine it'd be good. I believe that what the Q are there for is to prune the tree, to eliminate those things in time that are either of little significance or those decisions, those moments that are of big significance, so that it is all working in the same sort of order and direction. Not exactly the same, but neither of the branches get too heavy or too off that they would from each other, that they would split the tree. What the Q are doing are avoiding the worst catastrophe imaginable, the splitting of time. So this may be dumb, but that's what I was thinking about. I needed something that made sense. So this made sense to me. If you're watching this, I apologize for the poor videography and editing, but let me know what you think about the theory.